Hello, welcome to The Legal Pause. My name's Nick Gallagher and I'm the CEO of the Solicitors Charity. This is the second edition of Legal Pause, which is a podcast that considers some of the challenges and opportunities that are affecting the solicitors profession at the moment. In these podcasts I talk to colleagues from across the profession, from other charities, people who are shaping the discussion and shaping the help that are provided to solicitors in need. And I'm delighted that today we have with us Carla Hoppe, who is the founder of Wealthbrite, which is a very interesting organisation and one that we've been thrilled to discover. But Carla, perhaps you'd tell us a little bit about Wealthbrite and your own story, because it's a really intriguing one.
Thanks so much, Nick, and thanks so much for having me on this really important podcast series. I'm really delighted to be here. I guess for those that are listening and may not have heard of either me or Wealthbrite, let me summarise it like this. We are an independent financial education company working in the legal sector, and we provide critical financial management skills to power up the people in the profession and to protect the profession. And I'm sure we'll get into kind of what that means in practice as we go through this conversation, Nick. But to give people a little bit of the idea of the story behind Wealthbrite and how I came to sit here, having once been a solicitor, I guess let me take you back in time, as it were. And we're going back a little while now, but sort of 15 years ago when I came into the profession. I guess I was coming in as somebody who wasn't working class, but came from a sort of multicultural heritage background, an immigrant family who had moved into the United Kingdom, and very much came at the world from the perspective of sort of education first and opportunity next. And I landed in the profession, full of all the enthusiasm that you might expect of someone at the start of their career, but very quickly kind of faced with a series of, I guess, what I now appreciate to be quite complex financial decisions. As those who will know, working in the profession, annually we're asked to kind of make key benefits choices. We start earning regular income pretty early in our lives and are kind of faced with the realities of navigating financial adulthood. And I suppose for me, what I realised then and have come to appreciate more profoundly as I've moved through my career is that I struggled with really knowing what to do at the start of my career. I didn't really have the social network or the social scaffolding, as it were, to support me in making the decisions that I needed to make. And that meant I learnt by trial and a lot of error. And I suppose why Wealthbrite exists is because, sadly speaking, 15 years later, not an awful lot has changed. And we are still faced with a situation where generations are entering the profession and transitioning through their careers with very little formal financial education and very little by way of financial guidance as they move up the ranks. And unfortunately, what we're seeing, and I know what you are seeing, Nick, in the work that you do, is that sometimes that doesn't always translate into a positive, happy experience. And so our mission at Wealthbrite is to effectively be a pattern disruptor. We really believe that financial education is a pattern disruptor for those that don't grow up with financial privilege, but it's also a really powerful tool, an essential one in the practice of law. So yeah, that's a bit about me and how we've ended up here.
Your story really chimed with me, Carla. I mean, I'm not from quite the same background as you, but growing up in a single parent household without much financial guidance, I recognised some of the stories you were telling. But I think what you talk about is not just the importance to individuals of financial literacy, but the potential impact on firms of a lack of financial literacy, isn't it? So do you just want to tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on. I think, if I put it into context for people, in the United Kingdom, we are not particularly strong when it comes to financial literacy. So in terms of our world rankings, we don't rank particularly high. And that's because, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of financial education within our schooling systems. It tends to fall to the family unit to provide a lot of that. And of course, that is ripe for bias. It's ripe for false information. It's also ripe for an environment which is just not fit for purpose in the modern universe, right? And I suppose the costs and consequences of that are, as you say, kind of I guess not just for individuals, but also for their organisations. I kind of see them breaking down into two ways. One is on the well-being of your people and the consequences that has at an organisational level. And then the second is around a sort of a starker reality, which is the real risk and costs to businesses, both from a reputational and sort of a professional legal ethics standpoint. But we can kind of explore both in a little bit more detail if you want.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was struck then by what you were talking about from the individual side of things, because we're certainly seeing very ongoing levels of personal debt that solicitors are finding and financial challenges that they find. We have a partnership with an organisation called Penny Smart, who provide money management advice for solicitors who come to us for help. And in 2024, they managed to help with nearly £2 million worth of debt that our clients had, around £900,000 that they helped get right off, and a similar amount where they managed to help get debt arrangements put in place. So that's a big issue for many of our clients. I mean, we can also offer some more direct help after doing some financial eligibility checks, but we will help with sometimes with paying off debt on a one-off basis. But the really important thing is helping people understand how to manage their money, but also sooner in the process to actually be in a position where they don't get themselves into trouble. But we're seeing huge increases in the number of people who were referring to organisations like Penny Smart.
Yeah, and I know, because we've talked before about this, Nick, but I've also heard from others that this is actually a recurring theme across different charities, even outside of the legal sector, that in the UK consumer credit debt is getting larger, and those who are struggling to keep up with the payments is becoming more frequent. And I think what you just said at the end of that bit there is the really powerful piece for me, and particularly in terms of what we do at Wealthbrite. So we're not a regulated organisation. We operate within the boundaries of education and guidance, and so we're really the preventative action that is aiming to provide the skill set to people to, I guess, give them a bit of guidelines that they can learn to live by. And our sweet spot as an organisation is working with those at the very start of their professional careers, with this intent to give them a structure that they can build on. And our programs that we deliver, our first program that we offer within law firms for their junior talent is called the Financial Foundations Program, because it does exactly that. It's building strong foundational skill sets that can last a lifetime. And I think, to your point about this quantum of debt and problem debt, and let's be clear about it, this is problem debt, not just any debt. And debt is not per se bad, but actually it's when it becomes a problem and people cannot keep up with their payments that's when it can kind of escalate and get out of control. We see that pattern right back in almost like early stages of people's careers, and we start to see indicators in our data that all is not well, and then we are starting to see sort of patterns that can or could, I suppose, and this is a bit where it's a bit of a, our job as an organisation is to raise awareness of these issues, because we see that more people are calling for help from folks like yourself and also folks like our good friends in law care when things kind of impact on the mental health side of the equation, and money and mental health are inextricably linked. But we see more people calling for help, and so we ask ourselves, well, what can we do to divert them down a different path so that becomes less regular? And that's when we look at these core financial management skills. And so if I share with you some of our data points, which I think bring this to life. So first things first, financial stress in the system is very high, but we see that peak stress is at the beginning of people's careers. So around about it's actually on the transition from not qualified into being qualified, which some people are kind of surprised by, because their response to me would be, oh, but when you become qualified, you often have this sort of outsized pay bump that you think, well, surely that would solve a lot of your problems. And actually, for what we're seeing is there's lots sitting underneath the sort of the statement that I feel stressed or I'm worried about money. And what's sitting underneath is oftentimes a real sense of overwhelm within junior lawyers, that they do not know where to start when it comes to managing money. Yes, they're dealing with increased living costs. Yes, they're dealing with increased student debt burden if they've gone through the graduate pathway. But they actually, for many of them, have a real sense of stewardship of their financial positions. So many junior lawyers that we've talked to, have sort of recognised that, yes, I have been given a financial opportunity and I want to make the most of it, but I don't know where to begin and I don't know what to do. And critically, they don't identify readily with very many trusted resources. So again, you come back to, where are people going for their financial information? The vast majority of lawyers that we talk to say they rely really almost exclusively on family and friends or social media for their financial information. And of course, we know none of those options or models are perfect. And for an awful lot, they just say simply, well, I don't currently have anyone I can turn to. Yeah. And that's why, for me, it's so important that we create a safe space where people can learn without judgment, and learn in a way that is going to be contextualized to their lived experiences as lawyers, because there are, things are different in the legal profession. There's different expectations on you as a professional, not just in terms of how you show up at work and what you're doing and the stress that you have to deal with day to day, but also, as I've touched on already, financial management is actually part of your professional code of conduct. And I think it's really important that we are teaching that from a much younger stage.
Yeah. And I was struck by a couple of things in what you were just saying. One, about the age of lawyers who may be finding things difficult, and that it's right there at the start of the career. Yeah. Of course, we're a charity that supports qualified solicitors. Yes. But what we're seeing is that an increasing number of younger solicitors coming to us for help. So 40% of the people we help are under 40. Many are in the first few years post-qualification. And the other thing that struck me was the link between financial well-being and mental well-being. And we see it working in both directions, that mental well-being issues can drive people not to manage their money as well as they might, but equally it can be the financial side of things that is having an impact on mental well-being. And what we're seeing at the same time as we're seeing an increase in the number of people who are looking for things like money management advice, we're also seeing a huge increase in the number of people who are referring for mental health assessment and for counselling. So I think you're absolutely right that things do go hand in hand there.
At Wealthbrite, we are partnered with the Aston University, so in terms of providing academic support for the research that we do looking into some of these issues. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot with the team at the university about is kind of almost a reframing of the picture that people have in their mind around the link between money and mental health, that until fairly recently people have sort of thought about it as a vicious circle, and that one directly feeds the other in a loop. But actually we're starting together as a sort of academic unit to try to reframe that as in the shape of a helix. And if you think about the shape of a helix, what you'll sort of quickly grasp is, as it moves, it can have a drag downward or a drag upward effect. And actually that's the motion that kind of persists between the dynamics of financial health and mental health. And actually what's really powerful in that movement is that, yes, absolutely, the drag downwards can be quite stark and quite strong. But actually what we're seeing in a lot of the research that's being done is that actually intervention to sort of spin that upward cycle in a different direction, so that drag upward effect is actually very, very profound. And that even if you are starting from quite a low level of either financial health or mental health, as depends on where you sit, with the right targeted level of support, you are actually able to really overcome those barriers and hurdles. And so actually that upward drag of the spiral of the helix is actually very powerful. And so you don't necessarily end up coming back round and having the same problems again. You can actually pull yourself out of the issues. And I think for me, as someone who really wants to see kind of more people in the legal profession kind of move and shift from simply being in an awareness state on these issues into action, that for me is the critical piece, like that actually targeted support or targeted intervention can have a really powerful and profound effect. And obviously that's not just good for people, that's good for their firms as well.
Yeah. And I noticed you were talking about research then, and I was talking to Elizabeth Rimmer from Law Care in the last podcast about their life in the law research. But you've been doing an annual financial wellbeing survey, I think.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So every year we conduct a sector-wide set of research which really looks to uncover how are people in the profession feeling and dealing with their money. And we've been doing that for the last few years, and we will, depending on when this podcast is released, we will either already have released the survey or it will still be open for respondents. So please do participate if you've got the chance to. And essentially the survey and the research that we've done is to really basically ask and answer the question, are money issues, are money problems a problem for law? I think very often people make assumptions about the type of person that is a lawyer and the type of skills they have when it comes to money. And what we are seeing in our sort of 3 years of data is that those assumptions are actually often quite wrong. So I think, when I started Wealthbrite, I remember people saying to me, yeah, but lawyers earn loads of money. What's the problem? So the first challenge we had was to rebut the presumption that simply paying people more means they will have better financial health and well-being. And our data speaks very strongly to that. We see lawyers across the career spectrum from apprentice through to partner respond to our survey. And we see actually when it comes to financial stress and anxiety, we've got this actually a U-curve. So the peak level of stress is felt by those at the start of their career, and it tends to drop and even off as you kind of transition through year 3, year 4, year 5. And that we speculate is because for many people at that stage, they've kind of reached a point where their income may outstrip financial burdens on the basis that they are more likely to be single or living with a partner and don't quite yet have all the financial trappings and obligations that come with family or other issues. But what happens is as they reach 10 years PQE plus, that financial stress curve starts to rise quite rapidly. And we hear a lot from sort of later stage career professionals about how stressful they are finding managing their financial obligations. Maybe that's they have kids, maybe they're sandwich generation on also caring for parents. Very many lawyers, 60% of lawyers tell us they feel pressure to spend beyond their means to keep up with a certain lifestyle. And we've heard from lots of lawyers at later stages of their career who talk, at least behind closed doors, honestly, about feeling trapped financially, that their lifestyle has expanded over time and gotten to a point where it would be very difficult for them to step out of their current career position because they have so many financial obligations. Maybe it's the school fees, maybe it's the house and the mortgage, maybe it's all the other extras they've kind of accumulated along the way. And so for us, actually, we kind of reflect on that. We say, well, okay, so this is a problem for any type of law firm, regardless of their size, regardless of their location, and it's regardless of what stage of career you're at. And I think that's a really key message for me, that folks in the sector hear this. We're not talking about just, an isolated few in the profession who may feel financially stressed. This is actually much more widespread an issue than most people realise.
Yeah. And I think that our eyes here at the Solicitors Charity were opened during the pandemic, when we suddenly started getting applications from some really quite senior lawyers who were no longer receiving a salary. And it was the old truism about you're only, 2 paychecks away from disaster. And people who suddenly didn't have money coming in to service their financial commitments were finding themselves in very, very difficult situations.
Yeah, and to that question and to that issue, our data sort of tells a similar story. So we see a lot of lawyers. So we know a majority of people feeling pressured to spend beyond their means. We also see that sort of about 77% of lawyers say they have no regular habit or practice of budgeting. So they're not kind of actively going through the motions of analysing where their money is going month to month. We also see that law as a profession is actually underperforming against 2 key metrics of financial health and well-being compared to national data. So let me break that down slowly so people understand it and follow it. Number 1, when we test financial well-being in the UK, one of the key things we look at is levels of financial resilience. So there are 2 key questions that at government level we're very, very interested in. One is to what extent do you regularly rely on credit to pay for essentials because you are running out of money? And actually, we see quite a high percentage of lawyers respond yes to that question, about 42%. And then the second thing we look at is, okay, how much do you have by way of emergency savings? So at a national level, we know that about 11 million households have less than £1,000 in savings. By my estimate, that is actually lower than reality, because I think many people don't actually kind of really share honestly around some of these topics. And when we ask that same question, or we ask a question that's used by the ONS to assess this question, this sort of level of financial health, we ask the question, could you pay an unexpected expense of £850 without relying on borrowing or credit? Again, we see about 42% of lawyers telling us no or don't know to that question. And I suppose what's striking to me is that when you look at the correlation data between all these different metrics, we see that you are statistically, 77% statistically likely, if you're not budgeting, you're much more likely to be struggling to keep up, and you're having to pay for things on credit because you run out of money at the end of the month, and you're much more likely to be dipping into your savings and therefore not have that emergency buffer fund in case something happens. And I suppose people might be thinking, okay, well, so what? Well, I think the so what for me is, well, there's lots, and we could have a whole other podcast on the so what. But if I boil it down into really critical things for people to think about, I think it opens the profession up to a series of quite stark risks. And Nick, you came to a series of roundtable events that we hosted this year with legal risk and compliance leaders. And it was interesting because obviously conducted under Chatham House rule, but the stories that people shared in those spaces were quite telling for me. So padding, this concept of adding time to timesheets that wasn't actually done, is a very well-known phenomena in the professional services sector, but perhaps people aren't always connecting the dots between the folks that are tempted to do that because they are desperate for a bonus or a pay rise that is linked to meeting your chargeable hours targets. So we know that that has happened. And I don't know that people are always interrogating why these types of behaviors are taking place and connecting between financial stress and these types of unethical and actually in that case fraudulent behavior. I think there's also the corollary kind of impact of stress and how it shows up in the workplace. We know about people who are underperforming, that they are taking leaves of absence. Even the folks that are kind of showing up and not really, actually performing when they're in work, or simply more prone to making mistake or error. There's been a raft of SRA tribunal cases recently where we've seen this culture in law where people are seemingly very afraid to fess up if a mistake has been made. And that means that what could start out as a small mistake has the potential to escalate into something that becomes a sort of, a ticking time bomb. And so what we're seeing and hearing from people in spaces that you're moving in as much as we are, Nick, is that, very few people in law start out as bad apples. But more often than not, what's happening with a lot of these like reputational and risk-based issues is that somebody is struggling.
Yeah.
And they either don't know where to go for help or don't feel like they can ask for help. And that means there's a snowball effect. And this problem that potentially could have been solved at a much earlier point in time if only they had said, I don't know and I need help, actually becomes this kind of huge and quite damaging problem.
And
of course, that's really bad.
That really does link back to some of the conversations I was having with Elizabeth last week about people not wanting to ask for help or asking for help when it's too late. And indeed, when people come to us and we offer them support through organisations like Penny Smart, that's giving some people quite basic skills, budgeting skills, but it's getting them out of a problem rather than tackling the problem at the start. Now, we are very much a charity. Our objects talk about us helping people in need, but we do think that part of that is the sort of preventative side of things, and we've been delighted to provide some sponsorship, a grant to Wealthbrite, so that you can run courses for individuals, including for solicitors from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. But perhaps you just tell us a little bit more about those courses and what you're doing on those courses.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And we're really pleased and proud to be collaborating with the Solicitors Charity. I mean, part of why I was so motivated to do so is because, I think there are too few people that recognise or know that there is sector-specific support out there for them if they do need, and in times of crisis where they can go. I think, in terms of the programs that we offer and the really generous support that you've provided, that's going in a few different ways. One is that we offer a Financial Management 101 course for lawyers at the start of their career. And this is exactly what it says on the tin. This is back to basics stuff. It's starting with no assumptions and building people from the ground up when it comes to financial education and financial management around budgeting, saving, goal setting, and recognizing your relationship with money. And, as you pointed out, we've been particularly keen to make sure that those who are in low income roles or come from a low socioeconomic background in the profession are not prevented from getting access to this education just because of their circumstances. And so with your support, we've set up a social mobility scholarship fund. And that means that solicitors, so this is ideally aimed at junior lawyers. So if you're qualified and under sort of 4 years PQE, and you do work in a part of the profession that does mean you are on lower level of income, of which there are many, or you do identify as being from a lower socioeconomic background, then you can get fully funded places on this course. And we've been running them quarterly this year. We've got a good group taking the course at the moment, and what's striking to me is that the feedback from people having taken the course is it says it all, really. We asked people, what's stopping you talking more openly about money in the profession already? And the sort of language we hear is everyone's in competition, or it's expected that you already know this stuff, or salary secrecy means it's not the done thing to talk about money. But then when we ask people to describe to us kind of the shift in confidence and behavioural change after taking the programme, very often, particularly those that have come from working class or low income backgrounds, they'll describe for us a real sense that they've had a key to unlock a set of skills that they just never realised were so important for them, and that this has transformed the way they're thinking about things. But we also hear from people who have gotten into roles and they suddenly realise, oh, actually, I'm doing better than I thought. Or, oh, I didn't realise other people in the profession are also worried about money. This makes me feel so much less alone. And one of the big themes we hear a lot is that how many people report back to us, I didn't know that Law Care and the Solicitors Charity exists. Thank you for putting them on my radar. And for me, that's, job done. As far as I'm concerned, because it's part of like our mission to build a new generation of really financially savvy lawyers who can move through their career and become the ladder for other people to follow on behind them.
And that's a great reminder to me, Carla, of the 4 R's that we have at the Solicitors Charity. You're right, people don't need to be alone. There is support. So the first R is for people to reach out and ask for the support of the Solicitors Charity or of Law Care. We do need support to do our work, and we need support from the profession. And so the second R is remember financial support to us, particularly remember unclaimed RCBs, please. Do register, third R. Join our register for regular updates about our work. But also, you'll find us on LinkedIn, so do please follow us on LinkedIn and react to what we're doing to try and spread the word, because not enough people know about us, and we are here to provide support. People don't need to be alone. Anyway, Carla, that was a plug on my part about the Solicitors Charity. It's been a delight to speak to you as always. Thank you for all that you're doing. We're delighted to support your programme. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's been great to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the other interviewees on this podcast series myself. So I'll be following along, I'll be registering and reacting, so definitely encourage other people to do the same.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Carla.